Olivia is my heart's choice, Grant declares, his voice steady in the grand church where aristocratic traditions weigh heavily as he defends his love against his family's judgment. Welcome, listeners, to a story of passion, doubt, and redemption that unfolds in the most unexpected places. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below and share your city. Let's see how far this love story travels. Will a billionaire's fleeting glance at a wedding spark a love worth risking everything for? Or will societal pressures tear them apart? Stick with us for the next 50 minutes to find out if love can triumph over wealth and expectations. Don't miss a moment. Subscribe to our channel for the latest stories that stir the heart, and share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think happens next? Let's dive in. The chateau stood like a vision from a fairy tale, its stone walls bathed in the golden glow of late afternoon. Ivy clung to its turrets, and sprawling gardens stretched toward the horizon, alive with the hum of a wedding in full bloom. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees, casting a soft shimmer over the crowd of pastel-clad guests. Among them, Olivia moved, with purpose, her long black hair cascading like a midnight waterfall, catching the light as she adjusted her camera lens. Her burgundy dress, bold and elegant, seemed to defy the muted tones around her, drawing every eye, especially one pair, that belonged to Grant. Grant stepped out of his sleek Bentley, the weight of another obligation pressing against his tailored tuxedo. A tech billionaire, his name was synonymous with power, his face a fixture on magazine covers, yet here he was, just another guest at his college friend Ryan's sister's wedding. Ryan and Grant had shared late-night dorm debates before the world knew Grant as the architect of a digital empire. Skipping Grace's wedding wasn't an option, no matter how jet-lagged he felt from Tokyo boardrooms. He nodded to his driver, straightened his cufflinks, and braced for an evening of predictable pleasantries. Inside, the air buzzed with laughter and clinking champagne flutes. Heads turned as Grant entered, whispers trailing him like shadows. Wealth had a way of creating a bubble, one that kept people at a distance, seeing only the billions, never the man. He handed his gift, an understated but exorbitant contribution to the couple's future, to an attendant, and grabbed a flute of champagne, steeling himself for small talk. The garden ceremony awaited, and he found his seat in the second row, exchanging nods with vaguely familiar faces from Ryan's orbit. But then, his gaze caught someone different. Olivia wasn't part of the wedding party, yet she commanded attention with the quiet authority of an artist at work. Her dark skin glowed under the afternoon sun, and her movements were deliberate, each click of her camera capturing a fleeting moment of joy. She knelt to frame the bride's smile, her dress pooling around her like a crimson tide. Grant's breath hitched. He'd never believed in love at first sight, not with his life meticulously planned around mergers and market shares. Yet here, amidst the orchestrated chaos of vows and roses, his world tilted. The ceremony began, Grace radiant in white, Ryan beaming with brotherly pride. But Grant's eyes wandered, drawn to Olivia as she circled the perimeter, her lens an extension of her soul. She moved with a dancer's grace, anticipating each laugh, each tear, before it unfolded. At one point, she crouched low, angling for a shot of the couple's clasped hands. Their eyes met, hers bold, unflinching, his caught off guard. For a heartbeat, the world shrank to that connection. She didn't blush or look away, as others often did under his gaze. Instead, her lips curved faintly, a silent acknowledgement. Before she returned to her craft, Grant's pulse quickened, an unfamiliar thrill coursing through him. He was used to being seen, his wealth, his status, his carefully curated image. But Olivia saw something else, or perhaps he thought she saw nothing at all, just a man in a tuxedo, another face in the crowd. The idea was both unsettling and exhilarating. As the officiant pronounced the couple married, applause erupted, but Grant's focus remained on the woman in burgundy, now weaving through the guests, her camera a shield and a storyteller. The crowd shifted to the reception hall, a grand space with chandeliers casting prisms across polished floors. Grant navigated the sea of congratulations, his smile practiced but distant. He scanned the room, searching for her. Olivia stood near a floral arch, reviewing her shots, her brow furrowed in concentration. The sight stirred something in him, Masu, longing for something real, something untainted by the expectations that clung to his name. He sipped his champagne, the bubbles sharp against his tongue, and wondered what it would be like to step out of his bubble, if only for a moment. As the string quartet played, guests mingled, their voices a hum of gossip and laughter. Grant caught snippets of conversation, market trends, vacation homes, the usual script. But his attention kept drifting to Olivia, now adjusting her tripod near the cake table. Her hair spilled over one shoulder, catching the light like polished obsidian. He imagined crossing the room, saying something clever, but every line felt hollow. What could he offer someone who seemed so complete in her world? The sun dipped lower, painting the gardens in hues of amber and rose. Olivia stepped outside, chasing the light for a final shot. Grant followed, drawn by an impulse he couldn't name. He paused at the threshold, watching her frame a group of children chasing fireflies. Her laugh, soft but unguarded, carried across the lawn, and it struck him like a chord. This wasn't just an attraction. It was a pull toward something he'd forgotten he could feel. His life, built on billions and boardrooms, suddenly seemed small in the face of her vibrancy. He took a step forward, then stopped. What was he doing? He was Grant, the man who calculated every move, who never acted on whims. Yet Olivia, with her artist's eye and fearless presence, had unraveled something in him. The wedding, the chateau, the fairy lights, they were all a backdrop to a moment he hadn't anticipated. A spark that could ignite or fade, depending on what he chose next. As she turned, camera in hand, her eyes found his again, and Grant knew. This was only the beginning. The reception hall pulsed with life, a symphony of clinking glasses and murmured conversations beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. The air carried the scent of roses and anticipation as guests swirled around tables draped in ivory linens. Olivia stood near the open bar, her burgundy dress a beacon in the sea of pastels, her camera resting briefly in her hands as she scanned the crowd for her next shot. Grant lingered on the edges, his champagne flute half forgotten, his pulse still unsteady from the fleeting eye contact in the garden. He'd spent years commanding boardrooms, yet the thought of approaching her, a woman who seemed to exist, outside his carefully controlled world, felt like stepping onto uncharted ground. He adjusted his tie, a nervous tic he thought he'd outgrown, and watched as Olivia laughed with a bartender, her voice a melody that cut through the hum of the high crowd. She was at ease, her confidence not performative but innate, a stark contrast to the calculated charm he was used to navigating. Grant's life was a chessboard of strategy. Every move weighed for impact. But here, strategy felt inadequate. He wanted to know her, not as a billionaire sizing up an opportunity, but as a man drawn to a light he couldn't explain. The bar offered him a chance. Olivia leaned against the counter, adjusting the settings on her camera, her long black hair spilling over one shoulder like a cascade of ink. Grant took a breath, the kind he took before high-stakes negotiations, and crossed the room. The crowd parted instinctively, eyes trailing him, but he kept his focus on her. As he reached the bar, she glanced up, her dark eyes catching his with that same unflinching clarity from the ceremony. His rehearsed lines dissolved, and he blurted, "Your camera looks serious." The words landed clumsily, and he winced inwardly, expecting a polite dismissal. Instead, Olivia's lips curved into a warm, genuine smile, her laugh a soft ripple that eased the knot in his chest. "It's my weapon of choice," she said, her voice rich with amusement as she patted the camera. "I'm Olivia, by the way, friend of the bride, helping out with photos as my gift." Her hand extended, steady and unhesitating, and Grant took it, her grip firm and warm. "Grant," he replied, offering only his first name, a quiet experiment to see if his reputation preceded him. Her expression didn't flicker, no widened eyes, no subtle shift of deference, just Olivia meeting him as an equal. Not a professional photographer, then? He asked, noting the expert way she handled her equipment, the camera an extension. Of her hands. She tilted her head, a playful glint in her eyes. Oh, I'm professional. I own a studio downtown, weddings, portraits, the works. But today I'm here for Grace, capturing her day the way she deserves. Her words carried pride, not arrogance, and Grant found himself leaning closer, drawn to her authenticity. And you? Friend of the bride or groom? Bride or... Groom, he said, a smile tugging at his lips. Ryan and I go way back, college days before life got complicated. He left it vague, testing the waters, but Olivia didn't pry. Instead, she asked about his favorite memory with Ryan. Her curiosity genuine, her attention undivided. It was disarming, this lack of agenda. Most. The chateau's grand hall thrummed with the heartbeat of celebration, its polished floors reflecting the golden glow of chandeliers as the reception swung into full motion. Laughter cascaded over the clink of silverware, and the scent of roasted lamb and jasmine lingered in the air. The crowd, loosened by champagne, buzzed with energy, their pastel dresses and tailored suits a kaleidoscope of wealth and tradition. Olivia, her burgundy dress a vibrant contrast, weaved through the throng, her camera capturing stolen glances and joyful toasts. Grant stood at the edge of the dance floor, his untouched plate of hors d'oeuvres forgotten on a nearby table, his gaze tethered to her every move. The brief exchange at the bar had left him unsteady, as if the ground beneath his billionaire's empire had shifted just enough to make him question his footing. The DJ's voice boomed through the speakers, cutting through the chatter with a call that electrified the room. All right, everyone, it's time to light up this dance floor. Let's get every soul out here. Bride, groom, and all of you hiding in the corners. The crowd erupted in cheers, chairs scraping as guests surged forward, pulled by the infectious rhythm of a classic Motown hit. Olivia, caught in the tide, was tugged into a lively circle by Ryan's grandmother, her silver hair bobbing as she swayed with surprising vigor. Olivia's laugh rang out, clear and unguarded, her camera slung over her shoulder as she clapped. To the beat, her burgundy dress swirling like a flame in the soft light. Grant watched, transfixed. He never danced at events like this. His world was one of precision, boardroom negotiations, calculated risks, and a persona polished to perfection. Dancing felt too raw, too exposed, a surrender to chaos he'd long avoided. Yet something about Olivia's effortless joy, the way she moved with the music as if it were part of her, stirred a reckless impulse deep within him. His pulse quickened, not with the familiar adrenaline of a deal closing, but with something warmer, wilder, a longing to step into her orbit, if only for a moment. He set his champagne flute down, the glass cool against his fingers, and took a step toward the dance floor. The crowd seemed to blur, their faces fading into a haze of color and sound. Olivia spun in the circle, her long black hair catching the light like a raven's wing, her smile radiant as she matched the rhythm. Grant's heart pounded, a rhythm of its own, urging him forward. He didn't plan it, didn't calculate the odds or weigh the consequences. For once he simply moved, his polished shoes silent against the floor, his hand extending as he reached the edge of the circle. "May I?" he asked, his voice low but steady, his palm open in invitation. Olivia's eyes met his, surprise flickering across her face before melting into a curious smile. Without a word, she took his hand, her fingers warm and sure, and something electric sparked at the contact, a current that jolted through him, sharp and alive. The crowd parted slightly, as if sensing the moment, and they stepped into the dance, the music wrapping around them like a pulse. They moved together, not with the stiff formality of ballroom steps, but with an instinctive sync that felt like they'd been dancing for years. Olivia's movements were fluid, confident, her body swaying to the beat as if it were an extension of her. Grant, usually so controlled, let the music guide him, his hand resting lightly at her waist, her touch grounding him in a way he hadn't known he needed. The world narrowed to the space between them, The brush of her dress against his suit, the faint scent of her jasmine perfume, the way her eyes held his without flinching. It was as if the chateau, the guests, the weight of his billions all dissolved, leaving only this moment, this connection. The song shifted to a slower tempo, a soulful ballad that softened the air. Olivia didn't pull away, and neither did he. Their steps slowed, their bodies closer now, the space between them charged with unspoken possibility. Grant's hand tightened slightly at her waist, and she tilted her head, her gaze searching, his with that same quiet confidence that had captivated him in the garden. "You don't strike me as the dancing type," she said, her voice teasing but warm, barely audible over the music. "I'm not," he admitted, a rare vulnerability slipping into his tone. "Guess you're the exception." Her laugh was soft, a sound that seemed to settle into his bones, and she leaned in just enough for him to feel the warmth of her presence. The dance floor spun around them, but Grant felt anchored, as if Olivia were the only fixed point in a world that had always demanded he keep moving. As the song neared its end, the crowd clapped and swayed, but Grant barely noticed. Olivia's hand rested lightly on his shoulder, her fingers brushing the edge of his collar, and he wondered if she could feel the way his heart raced beneath her touch. The music faded, and they slowed to a stop, still holding each other's gaze. "Well," she said, her smile playful but her eyes deep with something unspoken, "you're not half bad for someone who doesn't dance." He grinned, a genuine smile that felt foreign on his lips. "Only because I had the right partner." The words came easily, unfiltered, and for a moment he wasn't the billionaire, the man on magazine covers. He was just Grant, standing before a woman who saw him, really saw him, and didn't look away. The DJ announced the next song and the crowd surged back onto the floor, but Olivia stepped back, her camera calling her back to her work. "Duty calls," she said, lifting the strap over her shoulder, but her smile lingered, a promise of more to come. Grant watched her slip into the crowd, her burgundy dress a flicker of fire amidst the pastels, his heart still thrumming with the echo of their dance. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity. That dance had changed something in him, and he wasn't ready to let it, or her, go. The chateau's reception hall glowed with a softer light as the evening deepened. The chandeliers casting delicate prisms across the tables now scattered with half-empty wine glasses and crumpled napkins. The dance floor throbbed with revelers, but Grant found himself drawn to a quieter corner, where Olivia stood by a towering floral arrangement, her camera momentarily at rest. Her burgundy dress caught the flicker of candlelight, and her long, black hair shimmered as she reviewed her shots, a faint smile playing on her lips. The electric dance had left Grant's pulse racing, a spark of something real igniting in his tightly controlled world. Now, as the party wound down, he felt an urgent need to keep her close, to hold on to the connection that had jolted him awake. He approached, a fresh glass of champagne in each hand, the bubbles catching the light like tiny stars. Olivia looked up, her dark eyes warm but guarded, as if she sensed the weight of his presence. "Thought you might need a refill," he said, offering a glass with a smile that felt more genuine than any he'd worn in years. She accepted it, her fingers brushing his for a fleeting moment, sending a quiet thrill through him. "Thanks," she said, her voice low and melodic, "but I'm pacing myself. Can't miss a shot because I'm tipsy." They moved to a small table tucked against a window overlooking the chateau's gardens, the fairy lights outside twinkling like a mirrored sky. The noise of the reception faded, leaving a bubble of intimacy around them. Grant sat across from her, his usual armor, polished words and calculated charm feeling unnecessary. Olivia set her camera down, its lens cap clicking softly, and leaned forward, her elbows on the table. "So, Grant," she said, her tone curious but direct, "what's a guy like you doing at a wedding like this? You don't seem like the type to enjoy small talk and canapes." Her bluntness caught him off guard, and he laughed, a sound that surprised even himself. "You're right. I'm here for Ryan, the groom's brother. We go back to college. Before, he trailed off, unsure how to summarize a life built on billions without sounding like a caricature. Before things got complicated, he finished, sipping his champagne to buy time. Olivia tilted her head, her gaze steady, inviting him to say more without pushing. It was a rare thing, he realized. Someone who listened not to impress or to gain, but to understand. "What about you?" he asked, eager to shift the focus. "You said you own a studio. What's that like?" Her eyes lit up and she leaned in, her voice animated as she described her downtown studio, a cozy space where she captured weddings, family portraits, and her passion project, photographing urban love stories. "It's about finding the real moments," she said, her hands gesturing expressively. "The way a couple looks at each other when they think no one's watching, or a kid chasing. A balloon, that's what I love, freezing those truths." Grant listened, captivated not just by her words but by the fire behind them. He was used to people asking about his tech empire's stock prices or merger deals, their eyes glazing with ambition or envy. But Olivia's questions, when they came, were different. "Your company," she said, swirling her champagne thoughtfully. "It's huge, right? Must employ thousands. How do you make sure those people are taken care of? Not just numbers on a spreadsheet." The question struck him like a dart, precise and unexpected. She wasn't asking about profits or power. She cared about the human side, the lives behind the numbers. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's a challenge," he admitted. "I try to push for fair policies, but the bigger the empire, the harder it is to stay connected to the ground." Her nod was thoughtful, not judgmental, and he felt a weight lift. For once, he wasn't defending his wealth or dodging flattery. He was just talking, unguarded, to someone who saw beyond the headlines. The conversation flowed effortlessly like a river finding its course. Olivia shared stories of her latest project, documenting couples in city parks and street markets, capturing love in its rawest forms. Grant found himself hanging on her words, her passion a stark contrast to the sterile boardrooms he navigated daily. When she casually mentioned recognizing him, "You're that Grant, aren't you, the tech guy?" He braced for the shift, the inevitable deference that came with his name. But Olivia just shrugged, her smile unchanged. "Cool, but I'm more interested in why you looked so miserable during the ceremony." He laughed again, louder this time, drawing a few curious glances from nearby guests. "Was it that obvious?" he asked, leaning closer. She grinned, her eyes sparkling. "Only to someone who's used to reading faces through a lens." Shapper. Honesty in her voice, the way she saw through his polished exterior, made his chest tighten with something he couldn't name. As the reception began to thin, the music softening to a gentle hum, Grant felt time slipping too quickly. He didn't want this to end. The ease, the warmth, the way Olivia made him feel like a man, not a mogul. "I'd like to see you again," he said, the words spilling out before he could overthink them. "No pressure, just maybe coffee?" His voice held a vulnerability he hadn't planned, and he held his breath, waiting. Olivia studied him, her expression softening but cautious. "Coffee sounds good," she said finally, pulling out her phone. "But I picked the place. No 5-star. "Nonsense." She typed her number into his phone, her fingers swift and sure, and handed it back with a playful smirk. "Wednesday evening, deal." "Deal," he said, his heart lighter than it had been in years. As she stood, slinging her camera bag over her shoulder, she gave him one last look, a mix of curiosity and promise, that lingered long after she disappeared into the crowd. Grant sat there, the empty champagne glass cool in his hand, knowing something had shifted. This wasn't just a moment. It was the start of something he couldn't yet define, but he was ready to chase it. The city hummed with the restless energy of a Wednesday evening, its streets alive with the glow of shop, windows, and the chatter of passers-by. Nestled between a weathered bookstore and a vintage record shop, the cafe Olivia had chosen radiated warmth, its mismatched wooden tables and local art creating an oasis of authenticity. Grant stood outside, his usual tailored suit replaced by jeans and a charcoal sweater, the casual attire feeling like a shedding of armor. His fingers fidgeted with his watch, a nervous habit as he scanned the street for her. The memory of their dance at the chateau, the electric pull of her touch, had haunted him for days, making this moment, their first date, feel like a leap into uncharted waters. Olivia appeared around the corner, her yellow sundress a burst of sunlight against the gray pavement, her camera bag slung over her shoulder. Her long black hair swayed with each step, catching the fading daylight, and her smile, when she spotted him, was both familiar and disarming. "You clean up nice without the tux," she teased, her eyes sparkling as she approached. Grant laughed, the sound easing the tension in his chest. "Figured I'd try blending in for once," he replied, gesturing to the cafe's unpretentious facade. "Your pick, right? Best chai in the city," she said, pushing open the door. The bell above jingled and the scent of cinnamon and roasted coffee enveloped them. Inside, the cafe buzzed softly, patrons hunched over books or laptops, the walls adorned with vibrant paintings and handwritten chalkboard menus. Olivia led him to a corner table by a window, its surface scarred with years of stories, and dropped her camera bag with a soft thud. "Just came from a shoot," she explained, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Family portraits in the park, chaotic, but fun." Grant settled across from her, his knees brushing the table's edge, and felt a strange vulnerability. Without the trappings of his usual world, sterile boardrooms, five-star restaurants, the weight of his billionaire status. Here in this cozy nook, he was just a man on a date, and the simplicity of it thrilled him. The barista, a lanky guy with a nose ring, called out to Olivia by name, sliding 2 steaming mugs of chai across the counter. "You're a regular." "Huh?" Grant asked, raising an eyebrow as she thanked the barista with a grin. "Guilty," she said, wrapping her hands around the mug, the steam curling upward like a whisper. "This place feels like home. No pretension, just good drinks and real people." Her words carried a quiet conviction, and Grant found himself envying her ease, her ability to belong in a space so far removed from his penthouse's cold elegance. He sipped the chai, its warmth spreading through him, and nodded. "You're right, this is different in a good way." The conversation flowed like the chai, smooth, rich, and unexpectedly comforting. Olivia shared stories of her studio, describing a recent wedding where the groom had tripped into a fountain, her laughter bright, as she mimicked his sheepish grin for the camera. Grant listened, captivated by her passion, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about capturing raw moments. He found himself opening up, too, telling her about a college prank he and Ryan had pulled, sneaking a goat into their dorm. Her laugh, unguarded and infectious, made him feel lighter, as if the weight of his empire could slip away for an hour. But it was her questions that unraveled him. "Your work sounds intense," she said, leaning forward, her gaze steady. "Building. Something that big. Does it ever feel like it's running you instead of the other way around?" The question cut deeper than she could know, touching a truth he rarely voiced. He hesitated, the mug warm against his palms, then admitted, "Sometimes. It's hard to step back when everyone expects you to keep pushing forward." Her nod was thoughtful, not pitying, and she didn't press further, letting the silence sit comfortably between them. They talked about music, her love for jazz, his secret obsession with old soul records, and the city's hidden corners, places she photographed that he'd never noticed despite living here for years. Each word, each shared glance, wove a thread between them, delicate but strong. Grant watched her hands move as she spoke, expressive and sure, and felt a pull to know more. Not just her stories, but the woman behind them. She was real in a way his world rarely allowed, untouched by the polished facades he navigated daily. As the cafe's lights dimmed, signaling closing time, Olivia glanced at her phone. "I should head back," she said, a hint of reluctance in her voice. "Early shoot tomorrow." Grant's heart sank, but he nodded, standing as she gathered her bag. Outside, the night air was cool, the street quieter now, lit by the soft glow of street lamps. "This was nice," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "Better than nice." Olivia smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Yeah, it was. You're not what I expected, Grant. Her words hung in the air, a quiet challenge, and he wondered what she saw when she looked at him. Not the billionaire, not the headlines, just him, maybe, for the first time in years. Can we do this again? He asked, his usual confidence, tinged with hope. Only if you're up for more dives like this, she said, her grin playful. No fancy stuff. He laughed, nodding, and watched as she walked away, her sundress catching the light until she turned the corner. Grant stood there, the city's pulse around him, feeling more alive than he had in years. This date, simple as it was, had cracked open something in him, a hunger for connection for her, and he knew he'd chase it no matter where it led. The city park exhaled a quiet serenity as dusk settled, its sprawling lawns and winding paths bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The air carried the earthy scent of grass and the faint hum of distant traffic, a gentle contrast to the urban pulse beyond. Grant walked beside Olivia, his hands in his pockets, her camera bag slung over her shoulder as they wandered deeper into the park. Her yellow sundress swayed with each step, a vibrant echo of their first date, and her long black hair caught the fading light, shimmering like a river under the stars. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, stories of childhood summers, her love for capturing fleeting moments, his rare confessions of moments when his empire felt more like a cage. The evening felt alive, charged with a quiet intimacy that made Grant's heart race with something he hadn't dared name. They'd been meeting more often since the cafe, stolen evenings between her shoots and his board meetings, each moment peeling back another layer of the walls he'd built. Tonight they'd chosen the park, a place Olivia called her sanctuary, where she'd photographed countless love stories. The path led them past a shimmering lake, its surface reflecting the first stars, and Grant felt a pull toward her that was both exhilarating and terrifying. He was a man who thrived on control, his life a series of calculated moves. Yet with Olivia, he wanted to let go, to surrender to the unknown. A cool breeze stirred, rustling the leaves overhead, and Olivia tilted her head back, closing her eyes to savor it. "This is why I love this place," she said, her voice soft but fervent. "It's like the city pauses here, lets you breathe." Grant watched her, the way her face softened, unguarded, and felt a surge of longing. Not just for her, but for the freedom she embodied, a life unburdened by the expectations that clung to his name. He wanted to tell her, to find words for the way she was unraveling him, but they caught in his throat, heavy with the weight of a life he'd always controlled. Then the sky shifted. Soft patter of rain began, tentative at first, speckling the path with dark spots. Olivia laughed, holding out a hand to catch the drops. "Guess we're in for it," she said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Grant glanced around, spotting a wooden gazebo by the lake, its roof offering shelter. "Come on," he said, grabbing her hand, the warmth of her skin sending a jolt through him. They ran, her laughter trailing behind them like music. The rain growing heavier as they reached the gazebo, its wooden beams creaking softly under the downpour. Inside, the world felt smaller, cocooned by the rhythmic drum of rain on the roof. The park lights cast a golden glow through the open sides, illuminating Olivia's face as she shook rain from her hair, her sundress clinging lightly to her frame. Grant stood close, his breath uneven, the space between them charged with an unspoken current. She turned to him, her eyes searching his, and the vulnerability in her gaze mirrored his own. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle as if she sensed the storm within him. He nodded, but words failed him. Olivia stepped closer, her presence a quiet force, and the air seemed to thicken, heavy with possibility. "You're different here," she said, her tone curious, not accusing. Less guarded. Her words struck deep, peeling back the mask he'd worn for so long, the billionaire, the untouchable success. In this moment, under the rain's soft cadence, he was just Grant, a man standing before a woman who saw him. He didn't plan it, didn't calculate the risk or weigh the outcome. His hand reached for her, fingers brushing her cheek, and she didn't pull away. Her skin was warm, a contrast to the cool air, and her eyes held his, steady and open. "Olivia," he murmured, her name a confession. And then he leaned in, closing the distance. Their lips met, soft at first, then deepening with a hunger that surprised him. The rain fell harder, a curtain around them, but all he felt was her. Her hands framing his face, her breath mingling with his, the taste of rain and something sweeter. The kiss was a revelation, a moment where time stopped, and the weight of his wealth, his status, his carefully curated life dissolved. He was alive, truly alive, his heart pounding with a clarity he'd never known. Olivia's fingers slid to his neck, grounding him, and he pulled her closer, one hand at her waist, the other tangled in her hair. The world outside the gazebo, the park, the city, the expectations faded to nothing. There was only this, only her and the electric truth of their connection. When they parted, breathless, Olivia's eyes shimmered with emotion, but she didn't look away. "Well," she said, a smile tugging at her lips, "that's one way to stay dry." Grant laughed, the sound raw and free, and rested his forehead against hers, the rain's rhythm a steady heartbeat around them. "I've never done that before," he admitted, his voice low, vulnerable. "Kiss someone in the rain." "First time for everything," she replied, her tone soft but teasing, her hands still resting lightly on his shoulders. The intimacy of the moment lingered, a fragile thread tying them together. Grant wanted to hold on to it, to keep her here, where the world couldn't intrude. But the rain slowed, the drops softening to a drizzle, and Olivia stepped back, her smile both promise and challenge. "We should probably get out of here before we're soaked," she said, though her eyes said she wasn't ready to leave either. They stepped out of the gazebo, the park now glistening under the fading rain, the air fresh and alive. Grant took her hand, their fingers interlocking naturally, and they walked back toward the city, the lights ahead beckoning but distant. He didn't know what came next, but this kiss, this moment, had changed him. Olivia had cracked open something in his heart, and as they walked, her hand warm in his, he knew he'd follow wherever this led, rain or shine. The stately church loomed like a monument to tradition, its Gothic arches and stained glass windows casting a kaleidoscope of color across the polished pews. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and wax, and the soft hum of organ music underscored the weight of the occasion. Olivia stood at the altar, her long black hair cascading beneath a delicate veil, her white gown a striking contrast against her dark skin, radiant with a quiet strength that made Grant's heart swell. He stood beside her, his tailored tuxedo, impeccable, but his hands trembled slightly as he clasped hers, the vows they'd just exchanged still echoing in the sacred space. Their wedding, held in this bastion of his family's aristocratic legacy, was meant to be a celebration, but the undercurrent of tension was palpable, a storm brewing beneath the surface of decorum. The reception unfolded in the church's grand hall, a cavernous space adorned with crystal chandeliers and long tables draped in silk. Guests mingled, their laughter polite but restrained, the clink of champagne flutes a delicate counterpoint to the string quartet's somber notes. Olivia moved through the crowd with grace, her smile warm as she greeted friends, but Grant noticed the subtle glances, some curious, others sharp, directed her way. His family, seated at the head table, was a study in controlled civility. His mother, Eleanor, sat ramrod straight, her silver hair pinned elegantly, her eyes cool and assessing. His sister, Claire, whispered something to their cousin, her smile tight, her gaze flickering to Olivia with a hint of disdain. Grant's chest tightened as he guided Olivia to their table, her hand warm in his. The love he felt for her was a fire that had burned brighter with every moment since their rain-soaked kiss. But here, in the shadow of his family's legacy, that fire felt tested. He'd warned her in the car on the way here, his voice low. They might not understand us. Olivia had squeezed his hand, her reply steady. Then we'll help them see. Her courage bolstered him, but as they sat, the weight of expectation settled like a fog. Dinner began, and the conversation started innocently enough. Small talk about the ceremony, the flowers, the perfect June weather. But Eleanor's questions soon took a sharper edge. Olivia, she said, her tone deceptively light as she cut into her salmon. Tell us about your family. Where are they from? The question, innocuous on the surface, carried a probing undercurrent, as if Olivia's roots needed vetting. Grant's jaw clenched, but Olivia answered with calm poise, her voice clear. My parents are from Chicago, raised me in a little house with a big garden. Dad's a teacher, Mom's a nurse. They're here tonight, actually, over there. She gestured to a table where her parents laughed with friends, their warmth a stark contrast to the chill in the air. Claire leaned forward, her smile thin. And your studio. Quite a leap from a small house to running a business in the city. Must be challenging breaking into that world. The words dripped with subtext, implying Olivia's success was an anomaly, a fluke. Grant's grip on his fork tightened, but Olivia's laugh was soft, unruffled. It's work I love, she said, her eyes steady. Every challenge is worth. When you're capturing something real, her authenticity, her refusal to shrink only deepened Grant's resolve. The tension peaked when Eleanor's voice cut through the murmur. Grant, dear, she said, loud enough for the table to hear. You know we've always hoped you'd connect with someone like Sophia, the venture capitalist's daughter. Such a suitable match for our family's trajectory. The words landed like a blade, slicing through the fragile harmony. Guests nearby fell silent, their eyes darting between mother and son. Olivia's hand stiffened in Grant's, but her face remained composed, a mask of dignity. Something snapped in Grant. He set down his glass, the clink sharp against the table, and turned to his mother, his voice firm but measured. Olivia is my heart's choice, he said, each word deliberate, resonating in the hushed hall. She sees me for who I am, not what I own or what you expect. That's worth more than any business connection or social advantage. He reached for Olivia's hand, lifting it to his lips, a public declaration that sent a ripple through the room. Eleanor's lips pursed, Claire's eyes widened, but neither spoke. The silence was heavy, charged with unspoken judgments, but Grant felt only clarity, his love for Olivia a shield against their disapproval. Olivia squeezed his hand, her eyes meeting his with a quiet strength that made his heart ache. Thank you, she whispered later, as they stepped away from the table to the balcony overlooking the church's gardens. The night air was cool, the stars above a silent witness to their moment. Not everyone would have done that, she added, her voice soft but thick with emotion. Grant pulled her close, her warmth grounding him, melting the tension from his shoulders. I meant every word, he said, his voice low. You're my family now. The music resumed, and the guests returned to their conversations, but the moment lingered, a turning point. Grant knew the whispers would continue, the judgments would persist, but standing there with Olivia, her presence a beacon of truth, he felt unshakable. Their love, born in a chateau's glow and tested in this hall of tradition, was worth every battle. As they returned to the reception, hand in hand, the weight of his family's legacy felt lighter, overshadowed by the certainty of the woman beside him. The city pulsed with its usual restless energy, but for Grant, the world felt muted, as if a shadow had settled over his heart. Days had passed since a grainy photo of him and Olivia, hand in hand by the park's lake, splashed across a gossip site, its headline screaming, Billionaire bachelor finds love with unknown black photographer. The words, meant to sensationalize, twisted something in Grant's chest, sowing seeds of doubt he hadn't anticipated. Olivia's photography studio website had crashed under a flood of curious clicks, and his phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Board members, colleagues, even friends, all questioning his distraction. The scrutiny was relentless, and though he and Olivia had laughed it off at first, the whispers grew louder, more insidious. At a charity gala, Grant overheard a murmured jab. "She's strategic, isn't she? Picking the richest guy in the room." The words stung, not because he believed them, but because they echoed a fear he'd buried deep. The fear that no one could love him for himself, not his billions. His oldest business partner, Lawrence, stoked the flame over a private dinner, his bourbon glass swirling as he spoke with practiced nonchalance. "This photographer of yours," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Quite the social climber, isn't she? From unknown to dating one of the richest men in the country. Might want legal to draw up some protection for your assets." Grant's reply was sharp. "She doesn't care about my money." But Lawrence's knowing smile lingered, a poison seeping into his resolve. The doubt took root, and Grant made the mistake of letting it fester. When Olivia called, her voice bright with plans for a weekend shoot, he was distant. His responses clipped. He hated himself for it, but the whispers had burrowed deep, clouding the clarity he'd felt at their wedding. 2 days later, they met at a quiet coffee shop, its dim lights casting long shadows across the wooden tables. Olivia, in a simple sweater and jeans, her long black hair pulled into a loose braid, sensed the shift immediately. She set her mug down, her dark eyes searching his. "You're believing them, aren't you?" she asked, her voice quiet but piercing. "After everything, you think I'm with you for your money?" Grant's throat tightened, the words he needed refusing to come. His silence was deafening, a betrayal in itself. Olivia's face fell, her composure cracking just enough for him to see the hurt beneath. Without a word, she reached into her pocket, pulled out the key to his apartment, the one he'd given her weeks ago, a symbol of trust, and placed it on the table. The soft clink echoed like a gunshot. "I deserve better than doubt," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her eyes. She stood, her dignity a quiet force, and walked out, leaving Grant staring at the key, his world fracturing. 3. Days passed in a haze. Grant moved through meetings like a ghost, his empire's demands meaningless against the void Olivia's absence left. Standing at his penthouse's floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawling below, he saw clearly what he'd almost lost. The wealth, the influence, the power. It was nothing without her. On the fourth morning, resolve replaced regret. He called Mia, Olivia's closest friend and an art curator, and laid out his plan, a desperate bid to make things right. A week later, Grant stood in a rented gallery, its white walls transformed by Olivia's photographs, her urban love story series, images of couples in city parks and bustling markets, each frame alive with raw emotion. He'd curated the exhibit himself, selecting pieces she'd long dreamed of showing in prestigious spaces, and invited critics, buyers, and local artists to witness her talent. The gallery hummed with anticipation, spotlights casting her work in a golden glow. Grant's heart pounded as he waited, his suit feeling too tight, his hands clenching nervously. Mia had convinced Olivia to visit the space, claiming it was a potential venue for a future shoot. When Olivia stepped through the door, her camera, bag slung over her shoulders, she froze, her eyes widening as she took in her photographs. Professionally framed and celebrated, critics murmured approvingly, buyers scribbled notes, and Mia gave Grant a subtle nod from across the room. Olivia's gaze found him, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding, a flicker of hope beneath her guarded exterior. "You did this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she stepped closer, her eyes scanning the walls. "Your talent deserves to be seen," Grant said, his voice raw with emotion. He took a step toward her, the crowd fading into the background. "But more than that, I was wrong. So wrong to let anyone make me doubt what we have. I love you, Olivia, not for what others think or what they expect, but for exactly who you are." His words hung in the air, vulnerable and true, and he held his breath, risking everything on the truth he'd almost betrayed. Olivia's eyes glistened, but she stood her ground, her voice steady. I need to know you'll fight for us every day, not just when it's easy. The challenge in her words was a mirror to her strength, the same strength that had drawn him to her at the chateau. I will, he promised, reaching for her hands, his voice firm, because nothing feels as right as loving you. She hesitated, then stepped into his embrace, her warmth melting the ache in his chest. The gallery's hum faded, and in that moment, holding her close, Grant knew he'd found something worth more than all his billions, a love he'd never let slip again. What a journey Grant and Olivia took us on, a love that defied doubt, tradition, and expectations, sparked in a chateau's glow and redeemed in a gallery's light. What did their story stir in you? Have you ever found love in an unexpected place or faced a moment where you had to fight for what matters most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your reflections. A huge thank you for joining us in this heartfelt. If it moved you, hit that subscribe button to catch our next story, and share where you're watching from to connect with our community. Until next time, keep your heart open. You never know where love might find you. See you soon.